sometimes also need to figure out how success is going to look like, right? And that's why I think like this kind of human part of the equation, right? Like who your co-founders are, how the early team looks like, and you having fun are so important, right? Like let's say you're starting like create an amazing business, but after 5 years you're like completely burned out with mental health issue. I'm not sure that's like it's a good trade-off.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we tell inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is Zeev Farbman. He's the CEO and co-founder of Lightricks. What started as an experiment between 5 friends doing their PhD in Israel is now a $1.8 billion Goliath in the app creation industry. They've created massively popular apps such as Facetune, Facetune 2, Video Leap, Motion Leap, and Boosted. Their most recent app is Link in Bio, as they expand to cover more of the creator economy. In this interview, you're going to learn about what somebody at the very forefront of the industry thinks about the direction that the creator industry is heading in, and how you can benefit, and how you can grow with it too. What you'll notice is that Zeev has such a refreshing outlook on life, and he really enjoys what he does. And I think this can benefit all entrepreneurs who are listening today. Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, Zeev. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Pleasure.
So I've used some of your apps in the past, and it's incredible that it's all from one company, and it's had such an impact on the creator economy. But from what I understand, you actually started by doing a PhD. So I'm really curious about how that led into entrepreneurship and eventually to Lightricks.
Well, I think it's a pretty cool story. During all my time in academia, I never thought about startups. Like I was really focused on doing the best I could in my research, completing my PhD, already started to look for postdoc positions. I actually kind of blame one of my co-founders for pushing me or us outside the academia. And the story that I kind of most vividly remember from this time is that Yaron, that's the name of the guy, he's our CTO, and I were working on a paper that was supposed to do some kind of major breakthrough, at least that's the way we saw it, in rendering, in like real-time rendering. That's something that's used in kind of game engines and games in general in order to create all these cool 3D graphics. And we were like really observed in these projects. We were working until, I don't know, like really late at night, and we forgot everything else basically. We forgot our personal life. Sometimes we were forgetting to get the decent food, etc. And I remember like one night we were going home from our lab in the university, and I remember like this exact kind of moment and even like the place where Yaron kind of offhand told me, listen, if we were working so hard outside of the academia, we would be millionaires by now. And I think I don't know how serious he was about this remark, but for me, it was like this thing, whoa, wait a second. Like, we are really working hard. We obviously really enjoy what we're doing, so it's not an issue, right? But we do work really hard. And that was like this initial spark for me to even consider, like, to be open-minded around the fact that academic career isn't necessarily the only kind of thing. What started to happen back then, the year was, it was like around 2012, is that we started to see cool image processing software coming on mobile. So it started maybe like with Instagram filters, but we also saw some people attempting to bring more kind of interesting image processing algorithms to mobile. I especially remember Snapseed by Nick Software. It was before Google bought them, and it was Apple's iPad App of the Year in 2011, I think. And this piece of software kind of really impressed us. And since we also did a lot of image processing and computer vision during our PhD, we kind of realized, whoa, we know a whole lot about these things. We know a lot about how to optimize image processing algorithms on parallel software like GPUs, etc. So maybe there is something interesting there. So we had like a really vague idea about what actually we're going to do. But we kind of realized, yeah, the skills that we acquired during our PhD are very relevant to this advent of mobile. And at some point, we almost kind of thought that maybe we can do it in parallel. We can both to continue in our academic career and to start some kind of business. But after thinking about it a little bit, one of our PhD advisors coined something that still at Lightricks we call the shower test. He told us, listen, guys, in the end of the day, as a researcher, when you are coming home in the evening and you're going to shower, there's going to be like this one thread that's interesting enough for you to keep thinking in the shower. You can't kind of think about two things in the shower. And we thought about it, like the co-founders of the company, and well, we thought, yeah, like the guy's right. It was Professor Anand Fatal. He's still one of the faculty members of the computer science department here. We decided that he's right, and we need to figure out what we are passionate more about at the moment. And while we still didn't have a clear idea what we were going to do, like this promise of something new, like the ability to work together with a kind of really close group of friends, like this sense of freedom, like in academia, we also had like this sense of freedom because in the end of the day, we had a lot of leeway in terms of what kind of stuff we can research, etc. But that felt kind of different. And we just decided, well, you know what, it feels great. It's a huge opportunity. If in a year or two, it's not going to work, we can always kind of circle back to academia, to industry, etc. So we decided to try to make it happen. And here we are, almost 10 years after.
Did you ever think when you started it would grow to how big it's become and all the different products that have come out along the way?
No, listen, frankly, I must say we're kind of constantly surprising about the size of the market. And our initial expectations were, I would say, extremely, pessimistic by current standards, right? Like we didn't know that actually there is a real market for content creation tools on mobile, for kind of more serious content creation tools. And when we kind of thought about first product, we saw that selfies became a thing back then. It was like a new word that was introduced to Webster Dictionary, etc. And when we started kind of to create all these kind of cool image processing prototypes on mobile, it became clear to us that people are interested in facial retouching. So basically taking kind of professional Photoshop capabilities and bringing them to mobile. So that's how we came with the idea of Facetune. And our initial hopes were that maybe we will able to sell with the kind of simple paid model on the App Store, like Facetune as an app, and will generate $100,000 in revenue, which will allow us to work on a bigger project that we already kind of started to think about. And if back then someone would tell us that in a couple of years, like Facetune itself is going to generate $100 million a year, yeah, we would be, I would say, beyond pleasantly surprised.
I also love what you mentioned earlier about the shower test, where for people who are listening, where they've got different ideas and they think about all these different businesses. But the idea of when you're in the shower and you've got that peace and quiet, what do you think about? And does it still apply to you today? Do you still much use that as when you're trying to decide about what products to launch? Do you have like one in your mind which like, I really love this idea?
It's actually kind of an interesting challenge because I think as a company grows, as a CEO, you need to figure out your kind of time slicing because typically, yeah, I think you can pigeonhole CEOs into kind of a different kind of places like product CEO, marketing, sales, etc., etc. But in the end of the day, as a CEO, you have kind of more responsibilities and you can't neglect all of them for like one thread you're kind of super focused on. So it's kind of more challenging. And another thing is that, like, believe it or not, over time, you start to realize that maybe sometimes the best outcome is in the shower, just enjoy the shower and not to think about anything at all, right? It's also, it's becoming a thing. So what I would say, like these days, that sometimes you're kind of become like really entangled in a specific project that you're like really passionate about, right? So, for example, you're like about to launch a completely new product or service, so there's like a really cool features coming out that requires a collaboration with different teams, etc. So yeah, you typically have something like that, and that's going to be kind of your sharp thought, but it's a little bit more nuanced, right? In the beginning, I think it's way more clear what your priorities are, right? Like when you start to work on a product, you need to be super focused to create the best possible product. Like all the kind of different issues of running company, etc., they're not there yet. And I think that's the huge advantage of entrepreneurs in the beginning, right? Like they do not have a whole lot of constraints that exist if you try to operate from the perspective of a bigger company or a bigger team.
How did you find that transition? Because you obviously started off more as a technical founder, and I guess your whole team were very technical because they were all doing the PhDs together. How did you find that transition to then think about the business side? Because that wasn't your traditional background. So did you learn a lot of hard lessons along the way?
Too many hard lessons. No, listen, it is a challenging transition that I think is still undergoing, and I think maybe I'm a little bit kind of ahead of the curve compared to other co-founders because, for example, for a while now, I'm not programming, right? Like the last piece of code that I contributed to Lightricks, even as a prototype, was in 2018, I think. With our CTO, it's still an issue, right? Like I think Yaron is programmer poet at heart, right? Like he can really write a poetry with code, and these days he has has almost 200 people, and he's part of the org that he needs to manage, and it's not very compatible with a lot of single contributor activities, right? So it's a challenge. It's not only kind of acquiring new skills and kind of learning new stuff. That actually can be fun, right? Kind of branching out, learning new things. It can be cool if you're in the right state of mind. But the flip side of that is that you're actually becoming less fluent and less up to date on the things that you consider it as your kind of competitive advantage, where you're like really good at, right? Like 10 years ago, I could sit with Yaron in the same room for a long time and come up with a SIGGRAPH paper, right? Like that's going to be something that's really state of the art in computer graphics. And these days, I obviously can't do it, right? So I can still go to SIGGRAPH. I can look at the presentations to understand some of that, but I can't contribute myself to that. And it can be even painful, right? Because you invested a lot of time to do research, to learn a whole lot of skills, and they're becoming rusty. So I think it's a dilemma that every founder should face once the organization grows, right? Do you want to kind of keep scaling with the organization, doing managerial positions, or you want to become the best or keep being the best you can in your narrow domain? I think there are great examples both ways, right? Sometimes you like really need crazy technical expertise, and if you do not have that, the enterprise might be doomed. I don't know, like I think about examples like in gaming engines, right? Or if you think about like John Carmack, right? Like now kind of a consulting CTO of kind of Oculus, etc. I think the amazing thing there is that he's still able to constantly push state of the art, right? So there are kind of different models to scale here. And yeah, that's kind of a hard question everyone needs to answer.
How did you come to that decision yourself? Because obviously you could have tried to stay more in the trenches and do more coding, but it seems like you enjoyed learning about the business side and growing that side of yourself as well. Did you have almost an existential crisis at some point trying to decide which way to go?
I think you already kind of pinpointed it, right? Sometimes just like reality kind of slaps you in the face, right? And the slap in the face in my case kind of came from like two different directions, both from the left side and right side. So first of all, like you're becoming bottleneck on many projects that you're participating in. Like teammates kind of on the project, they expect some kind of cadence because on your other head, you kind of expect that from them. And then you're a bottleneck. So they're kind of in a polite way to trying to say, you listen, just like get out of the way, let us do our work. Another thing is that if you're like really focused on things you're strong at, you're neglecting other things. And let's say the company grows. As a founder, you should figure out how you, I don't know, like manage investor relationship and do fundraising. How, if you're like operating in the environment of big platforms, how you're building a relationship with them. You need to build your finance, legal, IT, HR teams, etc. And again, you can bring great people on board, but if you're bringing kind of great people and not giving them enough attention, okay, to kind of do their job, then you're in a problem, right? Like you're not gonna, even like again, like super talented people who are great in their domains, they expect to for CEO to be attentive to their needs. Okay, so they're gonna do like 99% of the job on their own, but there are gonna be some bottlenecks, some organizational issues they're not gonna be able to figure out because part of your job as a CEO is, I don't know, for example, to figure out interfaces between different parts of the org, right? So if you're not gonna be attentive to their needs, they're gonna leave and you're gonna have a problem. So that's a step that I think a lot of time comes from the different direction, right? You're both becoming a bottleneck and you're not giving enough attention to the people in the org that are not part of your core expertise.
You mentioned funding there, and obviously it's a big part of your role too. And if I'm correct here, your Series D round was 135 million earlier this year, and it's about 330 million overall. And how have you found that process, going from somebody who's doing a PhD in academia to then shifting from that kind of domain to then asking for funding and trying to convince investors about your vision and your project?
Well, so for us, it was like a really kind of long evolution that I think is still ongoing. We started as a bootstrapped company, meaning that we didn't raise for a while. Our first fundraising was, and the company already reached kind of $10 million in revenues, right? So it was kind of a relatively mature state for a fundraising. I think the good thing that one of the founders of Lightricks, Itai, he was always interested on the kind of finance side of things, and with time he like these days he's actually running his own fund, and he always had passion for these things. So a lot of what I learned about kind of fundraising was basically because of him. He was also kind of kickstarting a lot of these processes at Lightricks. But again, it's kind of a constant evolution because even like the fundraising game is changing from round to round, right? Like when we raised our first round, it was because of successful fundraising, but it was with the funds in Israel that are kind of working with early stage startups, etc. Is kind of one thing. Our last fundraising, we saw a lot of institutional investors, which is again like a completely different set of like questions, kind of different process, different number of people around the table. So like you're kind of learning to do it as we go. And by the way, also like the environment changes, right? When we started kind of fundraising and the kind of process that we had and the timeline that we had in order to complete it, when I compare it to some of the early stage deals that I'm seeing these days, Frank, it's kind of crazy, right? I still don't understand what's going on, but yeah, we are in a different environment, different game.
Yeah, and well, I guess part of the different environment now as well is just how much the creator economy has taken off. So when you originally started Lightricks back in 2013, people were posting on Instagram, they were posting on Facebook, but I don't think there was the same sentiment that there is now, where there are many people who believe there can be full-time creators and it can be their career. And it's obviously one of those bets you took really early on. You saw there's this growth potential, and it's probably exceeded everybody's expectations. I don't think many people thought this time 10 years ago that we'd see like the huge surge in TikTok stars and YouTube stars that we have today. And along that way, was there anything that which you think that were key moments where changed that mindset? Because it's one of those things I'm thinking about now is, did Lightricks in a way almost help fuel this? Because the tools were available, it helped people become more professional, which then allowed them to make better content. And it's almost like this virtuous circle that goes on as well.
That's a great question, but like I think I'm going to unpack it into kind of different stages. Like first of all, a general comment about what's going on at the moment in creators economy, and then a little bit about how things evolved over time, right? So like I really think that creators economy isn't only a buzzword. It's from our perspective where we meet it, what we realize is that in the last, I would say, maybe 2 years, there's like a real shift in the mindset of our users of creators. They realize that they are the engagement driver of social media platforms, okay? And they also realize that they are not exactly leverage their power to extent that they perhaps deserve just yet, right? Like, I don't know if you saw, like Zach King recently published like this interesting story, right, where he showed his tens of millions of followers and views on TikTok with only $30 or something to show for it, like as a meaning, like as a what platform actually paid him, right? So creator economy is like, I think, a really interesting kind of a cultural phenomenon. It's like really shifting how people perceive work, how they kind of create content, how people consume content, right? You can basically claim that TikTok is becoming like a modern day TV channel with a really weird model where the TV channel isn't actually paying for content, right? So there are a ton of cool things that are happening that kind of gonna, I think that's going to be like really exciting in the next couple of years. So there is creators economy. There is a general fundraising environment at the moment, which I think is still kind of crazy, right? Like we recently see some corrections on the public markets. We do not see these kind of corrections on the private markets yet, which frankly is kind of plain weird, right? Like these two things should be correlated with the really heavy discount on the private market, right? Because liquidity to your stock. So how that's going to play out, who knows? And now to kind of evolution of kind of Lightricks and creators economy and the milestones. Again, like when we started, we didn't know that it's going to be a big business. Like part of what we wanted to do is, okay, we thought it's cool. We didn't know how big it's going to be. We thought about Adobe, which is kind of a market leader in professional content creation tools, as a role model. So we basically told ourselves, we want to be the Adobe of model. We have no idea how big it can be. And Lightricks in the beginning was like this bootstrap company with paid apps, really simple business model that got us to like roughly $10 million in revenues. And then we realized, well, the model is kept. We just can't justify development of more kind of sophisticated software. Consumer subscription kind of came to mobile, and that like really opened the next chapter for us. Like it justified writing a kind of completely different scale of software, right? So during like this period, we released 11 different products that kind of really cover a wide range of creative use cases on mobile. Again, like this consumer subscription is a business model that's scalable enough to kind of get us to kind of hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and it's great. And I think what happens for us in the last year, we kind of start to realize that yet again, the opportunity is bigger than we imagined, right? Like the same way that people sometimes, like talk about Web3, we are talking about Lightricks 3.0, because we realize that it's really a point where we should kind of evolve as a company with time, and we should structure ourselves not only to kind of be a tool maker, but establish ourselves as a platform for creators. Because what part of this like shift in the mindset of a users coming with the demand for a new software. So we see that our users that in the past created content basically as a hobby, starting to use services that help them to succeed on the social media, that help them to communicate directly with their followers because they don't want to be solely reliable, on the platforms. So there are like a ton of needs that our users have. And what we're doing at the moment is that we are building these additional services. We're also acquiring companies that already provide these services in order to connect them to tools, where the idea is that your creator's journey definitely starts with the tools. You need to create something, but it doesn't stop there. And I think there is like a really space for a company that put creator in the middle, okay? Because if you think about the platforms like TikTok, Facebook, etc., due to the nature of their model, in my opinion, they are misaligned with the creators, okay? And we are constantly trying to figure out how you build a business model that's aligned with the creator. One of the things that you're trying to figure out, for example, is actually how you can perhaps give the tools for free. So only kind of advanced services you're charging for, right? Like that only relevant when you start succeeding for a creator. So in that sense, I think like a gaming like engines is a kind of great business model, right? In some of the cases, you're getting the game engines for free. You can learn how to use it. And only when you surpass a certain scale of revenue, then you're getting a cut to a game engine provider. So from our perspective, the market is still evolving with the needs of the creators. I really think that content is the king, and a lot of things that were technological infrastructure that was the more important thing in the past gonna over time become a commodity. Like this positioning of a creator in the center is gonna be like a really cool thing for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I find interesting as well is you've got Facetune, you've also got Facetune 2, and they have slightly different models, right?
Yeah. So original Facetune was like the most simple model. You're paying like $2, and you're getting the app, basically a perpetual license, right? And Facetune 2 was with the subscription model where it's freemium subscription, so you're getting a basic functionality for free. And if you want to use kind of advanced functionality, then you're doing either monthly or annual subscription.
Yeah. And what I find interesting about it is that they can both coexist because they both serve different communities and different types of creators. And what I find interesting is how do you kind of determine that? You talk to obviously lots of creators as a business, and I think you held an event for Halloween as well with some like very large creators, and you've got that community of people who are fans of Lightricks, and it's self-marketing, right? Because the people who use your products, by their very nature, if they're successful and they use their products in the right way, they then build the audience larger, and that gives you more advertising and marketing because people know, oh, wait, that person got successful by using that. So I think it's a really strong alignment between the two goals there, which I think really helps you as a business because everyone's swimming in the same direction.
They do, but I must say that I think while we have some like really prominent creators that kind of use and mention our products, we as a company never, until maybe like this year, put enough emphasis on that. And at the moment, like we just like really start to realize what a crazy potential it is to work more closely with our creators. And like next year, we really have some kind of big initiatives that I think kind of we really hope to share soon, where we're gonna like really kind of start working with our top creators and also publicize it, because sometimes it happens internally inside the company, meaning kind of prominent creators are coming and we have in sessions with product people, etc. And it's like really kind of fun and exciting for everyone to see that like these top creators like really interested in the tools and have feedback, etc. But we definitely plan to do more of that, because again, like imagine that you have a community of like almost like 30 million people. There are a ton of like really cool people there that if you as a company, as a brand, associate yourself with, I think like the sky is the limit to how much kind of a brand you can build.
And you mentioned as well about the new products you're building and the acquisitions you're doing. And if there's a link in bio which was released in November, which is one of the first tools which is more about supporting the creators rather than creating content itself. Is that something which you're looking to expand into as well, where you said like you're putting the creator in the middle and how can you serve them?
So that kind of, when we're talking about like these layers of services that creators need, the kind of constantly say, listen, like it starts with tools. That's the beginning of creators' journey. It doesn't end there. And what we want to do is to bring as much value to our creators as we can, right? So one of the things that we're trying to help them is to streamline their interaction with fans. And again, like we obviously know that it's like kind of a huge and a crowded market. These days, link in bio is really becoming a commodity. A ton of kind of companies kind of release that because I guess it's relevant to a lot of different business strategies. From our perspective, what we're looking in link in bio is like this placeholder for kind of a cool web apps that are really relevant to our creators, right? Like I'll give you an example. Think about like a videographer that uses a video clip, and he can put like a widget in his link in bio that allows for users, for example, to like kind of upload their assets and start some kind of interaction, right? Or you can help your creator to collaborate with brands by creating kind of a relevant widget, etc. So a lot of what we were thinking about around kind of link in bio is actually how to create activities that are directly tied to the tools that we have, right? So it's not kind of a standalone play, well, kind of create a link in bio, but more like how we also kind of give you inside link in bio services that you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, it's the family of app system, which is essentially strong point of Lightricks, because if you find one app that you like using and you discover it however you discover it, and then as you start expanding, as you become more successful, then it's natural to be like, oh, I like this app, so this app is a good one to use as well. And I think it's very smart how you've grown in that way by making the different apps which are related to each other, but serve different needs. And
Well, amen to that. I guess we'll see next year.
yeah, in say like the next 5 to 10 years, what do you think the ambitions for Lightricks are? What's the direction you want to head in? Is there any big dreams?
I think we are like really excited about creating a company that put creator in the center. Okay, and again, like we really feel that at the moment, platforms that's where kind of on top of which the creators operate, they're like really misaligned with them. And I think like once you kind of start to think, okay, we want to help these people to succeed. Okay, we want to be, even in terms of our business model, correlated to their success. It like really kind of opens up your thinking in terms of kind of business model you can build. And it is very exciting because it's still going to be a whole lot of that around building kind of best-in-class tools. Otherwise, creators are going to, just like not going to come to your ecosystem. But it's also going to be a ton of kind of cool new opportunities around things that kind of are new to us, right? So I think, again, like in terms of the scope, subscription model got us to kind of hundreds of millions in revenues. I think like building ourselves as a company of creators that put them in the center, like really the sky is the limit.
And so earlier you mentioned that you're now looking at Lightricks 3.0. Is there anything in particular about the Web 3.0 more generally that really excites you, where you think like this is the direction which the industry could be heading, and you're kind of planning towards that?
So like these days, I spend kind of a lot of time to figure out what's around Web3 is a kind of buzzword and what might become kind of a real kind of mass market technology. And the theme that I kind of really like there is the whole story of decentralization. In some sense, you can claim that kind of modern platforms, when you think about kind of the big ones, they in a sense almost like captured the internet, right? Like there's like this venture capitalist that sent me the study that they did around what happens to each dollar that invested in startups kind of in general, right? And then it's kind of crazy. You see that its dollar is basically like a big chunk of it goes to the platform, right? And I think like decentralization in a sense that's, and again, like the transparency, that's kind of a big part of the themes of Web3, like just the way I see it. It almost takes us back to like Web 1 in the sense, okay, where Web was like this kind of more open place, more kind of transparent place, kind of also maybe more of the Wild West that's probably not going to come back because obviously like regulators these days care way more about the web. And there I also kind of see the promise for creators, right? Because if a lot of the infrastructure of the social media networks is becoming commodity, then again, like the content is becoming the king. If there is the kind of a good infrastructure kind of to create kind of ad hoc communities, to collaborate, okay, to in a way that again it's transparent, that you know exactly like who are collaborators on the project, etc., kind of shared in a way that kind of doesn't require kind of one centralized platform. I think there is a big promise there for creators as well. And we just like see that they're actively looking for it, right? Like I kind of, when we talk with our creators, a lot of their kind of concerns around the fact of how, from their perspectives, platforms are rigging the game, right? What they're basically saying is that, like, listen, we build the following on like this or that platform, okay? We build this following by kind of a lot of hard work, but creating kind of high quality content. And then the platform decide to tweak its algorithm, and then even in order to reach our users, we need to kind of to work extra, right? Which, like really, when you think about it, again, it's a great business model for the platforms. It's not so great for creators. And what we're kind of trying to figure out is where Web3 can be helpful for our creators in around like these themes of kind of decentralization, transparency, kind of sharing that doesn't require kind of centralized systems.
In terms of strategy there, you've got to it's difficult because, as you said, there's so many different new platforms coming up on the Web 3.0 space. So I've investigated some of myself with it's the DSO created by Diamond Hands, and there's all these different platforms coming up. But it's very hard to tell which one is going to be the dominant platform. It is difficult for a creator, but for somebody who's building a company based around creators, you've almost got to try to be one step ahead. And when you're building features, depending on where you think things are going to go.
No, yeah, listen, like I completely agree with you. Like like I talk a lot of to lot of like really kind of smart folks about it, to a lot of founders of these companies, and like really try to see how they see the future from their perspective. And I completely agree that at the moment, a lot of it is kind of very speculative. It's not there yet. It's trying to imagine the world a couple of years in the future. But from my perspective, something is happening. There are kind of really cool signs. There is like a really cool technological underpinnings, like a blockchain technology. And again, a lot of things aren't mature yet. But I think it's interesting. I frankly was kind of way more on the fence and skeptical about these things a year ago. But after talking to a lot of kind of companies and founders in this space, maybe I kind of drinking their Kool-Aid, but to me it feels that there is something interesting that's going on.
I agree with that. I feel like, especially in terms of podcasts and different YouTube videos, when you see somebody who's created these companies talk about it, it makes so much more sense than sometimes when you see it written down, or it's when it's second or third hand information, because those founders live and breathe it, and you can tell they fully understand the model, whereas it can sometimes be almost Chinese whispers, and by the time you hear it, it's like, that doesn't quite sound right.
Yeah, you know, like there's sometimes like this, I think, historical perspective on tech that I don't know, maybe might be useful for some kind of high level thinking about this trend, right? Sometimes when we have kind of a new technology that arrives, like the underlying infrastructure in the beginning is the king, right? Like think about like late 19th, beginning of the 20th century, things like I don't know, like telegraph and then radio, etc. Definitely, the infrastructure was the big thing, right? And with time, it switched to content for many different reasons, right? Sometimes the infrastructure is becoming commodity. Sometimes regulatory pressure is kind of changes the nature of the business. I don't know, like think about like railroads, right? Like there was time that was like crazy profitable business because you could basically dictate any terms you want, and then due to regulatory pressure, things change, right? And again, like you can think of examples of TV, etc. So there are like all these kind of games between what's more important, right? Like the infrastructure or the content. And I think these days, it's really hard to claim that the power is at creators' hands, right? We're not there yet. Okay, so if the pendulum is going to swing somewhere, I kind of feel that it should at this point swing more kind of towards content, toward creators, right? Rather the other.
So for people, aspiring entrepreneurs right now who are listening and they want to start a business in something which is as fast moving as your business, could you give them any tips on how to deal with the kind of chaos in a way of there's so many different options which could happen, and to kind of keep yourself sane and to keep going forwards and building?
Let's kind of be realistic. If you kind of start something now and you want to get to, let's say, billion in revenues, right? That's kind of a big number. Even, I don't know, if you're having some like really crazy idea, it's going to take what, like 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. But the world is going to be different in 5 to 10 years. So you need to have this time horizon, and then your considerations are going to be different. And like in these long-term considerations, I would actually kind of, well, you know what, maybe not even the fundamentals, so like really human stuff. You need to figure out who your co-founders are going to be. You need to make sure that it's going to be really fun for you to work with them, because founding agreement is, in a sense, more strict than a Catholic marriage, right? So you need to be careful about these things. And like these days when entrepreneurs are like early stage entrepreneurs are coming to talk to me, I actually try to discuss these kind of things with them. Like, listen, is it going to be fun for you? Did you already like find the people that you like really enjoy their company? Do you believe that you operate like in a really kind of big domain or something that in some unfolding of the universe can be a big domain, right? Like we also as a company obviously didn't start in a big domain, but well, there was like this huge secular like wave of mobile that got us where we are. If you want to have a significant business, you need to figure out on what wave you're riding, right? So like if you're trying to do something kind of long term, I would start like with these questions.
What do you think it's about, like your co-founders, that made the team work so well? Like, if other people are looking for traits they could find in people they would work with, what should those traits be?
So I think I was just like really fortunate to work with a close group of friends, right? Like one of the co-founders, our CMO, Nir, he's also like did PhD in artificial intelligence. He is my closest friend for 20 years. Like we met in the army. The CTO, kind of like Yaron already mentioned, that we worked kind of collaborated closely in academia together for many years. So Amit, kind of same thing. He was in our lab in the university, kind of even before Yaron. So like I really knew these guys kind of for a long time. A big part of fun being Lightricks for me is still to interact with them, right? Like among my direct reports, they are, like it's like a really kind of important group of people, and it's still kind of part of the fun. So I know it's kind of an unusual arrangement having such a kind of a big co-founding team, etc. But I think for us, it worked extremely well.
Yeah, and it's nice to hear as well where you enjoy working with the people that you work with and you've known them for so long.
Listen, like I know it sometimes kind of sounds a bit weird to people that I emphasize fun so much, but I remember when we just like started to think about a startup, I started to read about like entrepreneurship and what the role of CEO is, and I think I saw this post on Quora, I believe, where someone like really, I think, like emphasizes it really well, right? Like when people talk about early stage startups and entrepreneurs and kind of in general about like these early stages, they focus on failures. You hear numbers thrown like, oh, 95% of the stuff shall fail, etc. But actually, sometimes people do not talk enough on what happens when the company is actually successful, right? Because you can kind of change your perspective and say, well, you know what? You tried something after you realize it's not your thing. Like no harm done, right? But if the company is successful and it kind of keeps growing, and you're stuck in the environment that you kind of don't appreciate, but you're already kind of super emotionally invested and financially invested, etc., then it might be a big problem, right? Like example, I think they gave in this Quora post was around the Google founders, right? Like these guys were in academia doing their masters. They started to run kind of really fast, established Google, etc. And then it's kind of run faster and faster and faster kind of for many years. So you sometimes also need to figure out how success is going to look like, right? And that's why I think like this kind of human part of the equation, right? Like who your co-founders are, how the early team looks like, and you having fun are so important, right? Like let's say you're starting like create an amazing business, but after 5 years you're like completely burned out with mental health issue. I'm not sure that's like it's a good trade-off, so you should be mindful of these issues as well.
Yeah, and other than like the people you work with, is there anything else you do to avoid burning out in your role with all the pressure that comes with it?
Sometimes when people kind of ask me why I'm kind of keep doing what I'm doing after you already do not have like financial pressures or like financial goals, like personal financial goals aren't that important for you. And again, it might sound cheesy, but I think a lot of it is around like kind of personal growth that in my case translates to kind of exactly that. To figure out how you can thrive in an environment that people perceive kind of as really stressful. Because like, frankly, from my perspective, like over time, I think more and more that it doesn't have to be stressful, right? Like you can have fun and sometimes, yeah, like challenging things are happening, but if you let's for example like use a sports metaphor, right? Like if you're like playing your like favorite game, okay, your best performance is then you're on one hand alert, right? Like you have like a decent pulse, but your heart rate isn't like too high, right? Like you're exactly in the middle where like you engaged but not stressed, and that's where optimal human performance is, right? So if you're kind of constantly stressed or you're like completely not interested in what you're doing, then you have a problem and you need to figure out. And like from my perspective, that's like the growth part, right? To make sure that you're kind of exactly there. And a lot of that is coming from reframing. Like basically some things are triggers you at work. Like it could be like emotional triggers around performance of the company, interactions with other teammates, etc., etc. And you constantly need to figure out how to tackle that, right? And the cool thing is that you figure out how to tackle that. I think you're becoming a happier person, okay, which is kind of a great outcome. And for me, it's frankly a kind of a part of the fun in kind of engaging in these like activities like becoming an entrepreneur, right? Like it's a challenging journey, but if you figure out how to tackle it, well, something cool might happen to you besides, all the financial parts and things.
Yeah, and you mentioned you were reading books when you started the entrepreneurship journey. If there's somebody listening today who wants to read a book to really help them on their path, what would you recommend to entrepreneurs?
With time, my kind of position evolves to being a resident librarian, right? Because kind of people are coming to talk to me and I recommend books to them. But interestingly enough, I do not like to give like this kind of blanket recommendations because they're typically not applicable to everyone, right? Like part of the I typically try to do is just like listen what's on the person's plate at the moment and what can actually might help them, right? Because again, like entrepreneurs are coming from a ton of different backgrounds and they have different needs, right? Like again, since like you already kind of mentioned, we were not coming from a business perspective. So when we did our first fundraising, we needed to learn how to do that. So we bought a book. A lot of entrepreneurs with a really kind of strong business background, and then these issues aren't a thing for them, right? So with your kind permission, I'm going to evade.
No, there's no problem. And that makes a lot of sense as well, because as you said, everybody's got different circumstances, and what's one book that might work for one person might be something that somebody else already knows. But it's been a pleasure to chat to you, Zeev. Where can people hear more about what you do and about Lightricks and everything that's going on?
So Lightrickscom is undergoing kind of a big overhaul at the moment in order to kind of reflect our aspirations around creators economy, etc. But that's kind of a cool place to find about what's going on with us.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on again.
Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure.